Boring history for sleep, why medieval Europeans thought toads could forecast rain. Hey guys, tonight we slip off into a strange, squishy little corner of the past, one that smells like wet earth and sounds like croaking. You're trudging through a medieval village, mud clinging to your boots, mist curling around your ankles like sleepy cats, and just over that rise, a pond, brimming with noise. Not from people or livestock, but from dozens, maybe hundreds of toads, warbling like tiny, mucus-coated prophets of the weather. And let me know in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is for you. Might not guess it from their wide-set eyes and questionable skin texture. But back then, toads were basically nature's meteorologists. Around you, lanterns flicker from thatched cottages, casting golden glows across the water. Toads line the edge like tiny sentinels, throats puffing in and out with lazy rhythm. A slow, deep rhythm, steady drizzle, silence, either drought or something worse. Maybe a wolf. The villagers, barefoot and a little muddy, glance skyward, then downward toadward as. If weighing which source might better predict a sudden downpour, you've probably heard that touching a toad gives you warts. Thank medieval Europe for that delightful myth. Back then, toads were seen as a little bit magical, a little bit malevolent, equal parts familiar and feared. She's out front tonight, sitting on a low stool, a massive toad perched on her knee like a lumpy house cat. She strokes it gently, murmuring he knows. He always knows. You remember what that monk said a few decades later, when a man sees a toad croak before rain, forgets the 9 times it croaked before nothing? Classic selective memory. The healer gathers her toad like royalty, cradling him in the crook of her arm and vanishing into her hut. You stand, stretching your legs as the drizzle strengthens. It's soft at first, like being kissed by ghosts, but you know it'll pick up. You're not entirely sure what he knows. But the villagers seem convinced enough to adjust their travel plans based on his behavior. One of the toads lets out a sharp, almost celebratory bellow. It echoes across the pond like a triumph. A few villagers glance at each other and nod. No one's surprised. A dog curls up beside you, unbothered. The toads keep singing. If you listen closely, it almost sounds like lullabies. It tastes vaguely like dandelion and old leather, but it warms your hands. But in a world where thunder kills crops and wet boots mean fever, a croaking chorus under moonlight might just be the best guess you've got. He points to the pond and mutters, "They always know," even before the wind changes. They lived in liminal places between water and land. Night and day-on humans assumed they must know something. Toads are sensitive to humidity. Their skin needs moisture, and changes in barometric pressure can affect their behavior. They're more active before rain. So yes, your medieval weather person was damp, bug-eyed, and not great at conversation. But they might have had a 60% chance of beating your weather app in spring. Maybe the future. Maybe your sins. Maybe where the next thunderstorm's brewing. He tosses it a beetle, then whispers again. Can't make out the words, but the reverence is obvious. If it starts croaking again right away, it means the sickness will pass. If it doesn't, well, you might want to check if old Jeffrey's still breathing. This isn't a pet, it's a barometer with warts. Spoiler alert, they usually went with the toads. At least that's what medieval Europeans believed. They didn't have weather apps, satellites, or even barometers. What they did have were a lot of rainy days and even more superstition. So the toads, those eternally damp little creatures, became living, croaking omens. When toads croak louder or more frequently, villagers start prepping buckets and pulling cloaks out of storage. It's not just hearsay either. There are rules, passed down from grandmothers who never learned to write, but could read a toad's mood like a book. If the toads climb high, clouds will cry. Or, if they burrow deep, your wheat you'll reap. Is it poetry? Technically, is it accurate? Historians still argue whether these animal-based forecasts were rooted in observation or just reinforced coincidence. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a week in this village. There's no plumbing, no Wi-Fi, and frankly, the toads are the most hygienic thing here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel by the pond, the ground beneath you soft and cold, like pudding left too long in the cellar. Here, the connection between weather and animals isn't metaphor, it's law. Still, there's something hypnotic about it. The villagers don't just hear croaks, they interpret them, a high-pitched, frantic ribbit. Thunder. You pass by a boy barefoot, grubby eyes, wide crouched next to a log, whispering to a fat brown toad like it's a holy man. And those warts? Oh yes, that's another thing. The village healer, or as some whisper behind her back. The mud crone swears that if a toad stops croaking suddenly, someone nearby will get sick. You pass her hut, thatched in soggy reeds, with bundles of herbs dangling from the eaves, and the vague smell of damp socks wafting from within. Oddly enough, some parts of the lore make a kind of rustic sense. Still, modern scholars are split. Some suggest villagers genuinely observed patterns and link them to natural signs like animal behavior, while others believe it was pure confirmation bias. You're jolted from your thoughts as a raindrop kisses your nose. The children squeal and scatter, some slipping in the grass, laughing. As you walk back toward the cottages, a man offers you a mug of hot something. You glance back. The toads are still at it, ribbiting, puffing, announcing the inevitable. It's not flashy. It's not scientifically precise. A bell rings in the distance curfew. You duck under an awning, rain dripping down from the straw roof. The next morning, you wake to the sound of splattering rain tapping on the roof like a polite but insistent guest. Somewhere nearby, a toad croaks lazily, one long, warbled note. The kind that says, "I told you so." The air smells like soaked straw and wood smoke. It's not unpleasant, really just very medieval. Toad's End, find yourself face to face with the reason for all the fuss. A particularly chubby amphibian sitting on a flat rock like it owns the place. Its warty skin glistens in the morning drizzle, and it's just sitting there, not moving, just watching. And as you stretch and rub your eyes, you catch sight of a strange little huddle near the blacksmith's hut. And yet, somehow, no one seems particularly anxious about their data source having webbed toes. In this time and place, toads are more than animals. They're semi-magical, mildly feared, and completely tangled in folklore. Some folks believe toads were born of mud and lightning literally formed when thunder struck the earth. His cart creaks and leans under the weight of jars, bundles, and vaguely slimy things wrapped in linen. One jar contains what looks suspiciously like pickled toad. Inside, the toad's eyes are glassy and its legs awkwardly folded like a failed yoga pose. The apothecary swears it draws out the bad air. It says if you bury the bones under your threshold, they'll ward off rain demons. Historians still argue whether these bizarre medical uses were symbolic gestures, or if people actually drank toad tea. Honestly, you're hoping it's the former. Others thought they were witches' familiars, vessels for dark powers, or even devils in disguise. And yet, paradoxically, they were also used in medicine. You're seated near the hearth, hands curled around a steaming mug of something that tastes like if cinnamon and regret had a baby. A man next to you, beard frosted with ale foam, leans in conspiratorially and says, "Toads know things. From mother to spawn, knowledge in the blood, that they can cause floods, summon fog, or steal clear skies." One old tale claims a toad stared at a baker's fire too long and turned the entire oven to ash. In a world where the skies are unpredictable, where a single storm can ruin your crop and starve your family, the idea that anything might give you a heads up, or better yet, let you negotiate with the clouds, that's powerful. Moral of the story, don't offend a toad, even if it's staring at your scones. They don't just predict rain. They remember storms. Pass it along, croak to croak. Or if it was just the medieval version of, well, we have to blame something. Humans like scapegoats, or in this case, scapetoads. Somewhere in the puddle, just outside, you see movement. A squat shape with a wide mouth and bulbous eyes. It turns just slightly, like it knows you're watching. You know, in the same way that a medieval remedy might involve crushed emeralds or powdered mummy dust. Which makes sense considering the Middle Ages was a period where your doctor might bleed you with a sharpened spoon, and the moon was still accused of causing mental illness. People circling something, whispering, holding their cloaks tight. For some, toads bring rain and, not the helpful, field-watering kind. No, some believe they call down destructive storms as a form of punishment. For what? Hard to say. walking through their puddle, cursing at the wrong saint, failing to share your cheese. You step outside, boots squelching into mud that's decided to double as the village welcome mat. You push your way gently through the crowd, careful not to step on any feet, or, heaven forbid, you wonder idly if this is what the early meetings of the Royal Society looked like. Probably less toads. But the murmurs are clear. See how still he is? You hear a splash, then a scolding voice. Leave it be, you little rot. You'll bring a storm with that nonsense. That means it'll rain through supper. Someone else pipes up, or the river will flood. My uncle's chicken swears it. You suppress a laugh. Barely. It's hard to tell where weather lore ends and old-fashioned gossip begins. You overhear a woman explaining to her child, who seems more interested in stepping on snails, that a toad croaked dose in tea just forecast rain. It can also bring it. If you whisper your hopes into its back and it croaks thrice, the clouds will answer, she says. Her voice has that storyteller lilt, the kind you'd use to coax a child into wearing shoes. Of course, not every belief was so wholesome. Toads were often wrapped up in a muddled mix of fear and fascination. There's a traveling apothecary in the village today, and he's already drawing a crowd, announces. 4 coughs, colds, and unwanted pregnancies, try boiled toad tea. Several people gag audibly. Someone claps. You examine the jar. The woman beside you doesn't hesitate. She buys a small pouch labeled dried wart dust. For rainy moods, you don't ask. At the tavern that evening, things get even weirder. You blink slowly. Another nods. Aye, they pass it down. It's clearly nonsense, but everyone around the table nods with solemn, slightly drunken agreement. But not everyone in town worships the warty ones. You're walking back toward the inn when a boy sprints past you with a stick, shouting something about getting the toad before it curses mum again. Apparently, local superstition runs both ways. In fact, there's a whole corner of belief dedicated to this idea, that toads are weather agents, not just forecasters. Modern scholars still debate whether these fears came from actual natural disasters. Still, it's hard not to see the appeal. You sit by your window, candle flickering low, watching the rain curl down the glass like lazy fingers, and then it croaks. Once, twice. A pause. Then a third time. You smile to yourself. Just like the woman said. The next day arrives soggy and gray, a fog clinging to the fields like a half-forgotten dream. Everything smells faintly of mildew and sheep. You wander through the muddy paths of the village, hearing the telltale sounds of boots squelching and cloaks snapping in the wind. One swears his toad sang louder than his wife last night. Another claims has leaped clear over a bucket. Never does that, unless it's going to pour, he insists. And just when you think it can't get any stranger, someone produces a small toad with a red ribbon tied gently around its belly. It's not just another wet day, it's rain season, and everyone is on edge. Except, unlike the carefully choreographed rituals you might imagine, this one mostly involves copying toads. You spot 3 people down by the field, crouching, hopping in slow, exaggerated arcs. West, we drown. And pausing every few steps to puff out their cheeks and make guttural noises that sound like a goose choking on porridge. You pass a group of farmers gathering in the square, each muttering about what they've seen from their toads. Apparently, this is part of what the villagers call a rain dance. The crowd gasps. Some nod knowingly. One man wipes a tear. You meanwhile wonder if any of them noticed it was just trying to escape. You blink, then you laugh. Quietly, because they look so serious about it. This, you're told, is a local tradition called toad mirroring. Comfort, order, a feeling that you're not at the complete mercy of the skies. His opponent, a boy no older than 10, responds with an impressively nasaled trill that garners applause and a gift of pickled onions. It's absurd. And kind of wonderful. It's less ridiculous than it sounds. Slightly. 2 villagers at a time face off, doing their best to mimic the croaks they heard the night before. Others say it was stolen. Either way, they've had famine ever since. Loudness, accuracy, and what one elderly judge calls authentic throat wobble are all scored. If dancing like a toad and humming into moss gives you that illusion, then grab your belt of reeds and get hopping. Not quite gods, not quite pets, but something in between. Even if the exact how and why remains as murky as the pond they crawled out of, the villagers are quiet. No dancing tonight, just listening. Stops the rain from ruining my silks, she insists. You can't tell if she believes it or just likes the conversation starter. Helpers, harbingers, a living bridge between human desperation and the impersonal skies above. It's part game, part ritual, part survival tactic. This one's more solemn, less hopping, more humming. He speaks of a village 3 days east where they built a shrine to a sacred toad said to bring perfect weather year-round. They offered it beetles, bathed it in spring water, and sang lullabies to it every night. Then, one day it vanished. The villagers panicked. Within a week, hail flattened every field. A nearby farmer hears you and nods approvingly. Not bad. You've got the makings of a storm chaser. A circle of villagers surrounds a shallow stone bowl filled with water, where a single toad sits, motionless, except for the rise and fall of its throat. They've placed herbs and tiny bones around it, like it's the guest of honor at a very awkward dinner party. It's believed that mimicking a toad's posture and sounds will encourage rain or stop it. Depending on the season and the toad's mood, the logic? Well, if the toad is nature's messenger, then acting like the toad might help you speak its language. Historians still argue whether this kind of sympathetic magic was ever believed by everyone, or just something people did when they were desperate, bored, or drunk. Probably a cocktail of all three. You stand there for a bit, watching people hop, squat, and croak, till an older woman offers you a belt made of woven reeds. For better leaps, she explains. You politely decline, but she shrugs and ties it around your waist anyway. There, now the clouds will listen. Later in the woods just past the mill, you find a different kind of ritual underway. The leader, a woman in a hooded cloak made of damp burlap, whispers, if he jumps east, the sun will break. Everyone watches. The toad does nothing. A full minute passes. Then, without warning, it hops not east, not west, but directly into the bowl, splashing like a hairy potato. Still, these moments matter here. They hold weight not because of what they prove, but because of what they promise. Back in the village square, someone sets up a long bench and begins preparing for what's known as the croak-off. You watch as a burly blacksmith emits a deep gurgling sound that causes a nearby baby to cry. You find yourself drawn and listening, watching, even trying a quiet croak or two. And why not? In this strange, rain-soaked world, a good croak might mean the difference between planting your barley or watching it drown. Of course, not all toad-related weather practices were so light-hearted. You hear a tale that evening from a traveling juggler, a man with more rings than teeth. The juggler's eyes glitter as he leans in. Some say it left because a boy laughed at its face. You sip your ale and try not to look nervous. It's hard to shake the sense that toads, in this time, aren't just gross little amphibians, they're living rituals. A merchant who deals in charms tells you that she always travels with a dried toad's foot in her satchel. But no one doubts that toads matter. You end your day back near the same pond, the air now filled with the gentle thrum of croaking and the occasional buzz of a persistent gnat. You find yourself crouching again, without even thinking, mirroring, and when you let out a small, throaty croak, just a sign no one laughs. The next week brings a dry spell. The villagers call it toad silence. Not a single croak in days, and people are starting to fidget. Not because they miss the noise exactly, but because in this world, silence is suspicious, dangerous. It's like the frogs know something you don't and they're refusing to tell. You pass a shepherd with his hand pressed dramatically to the sky, muttering, the toads have gone mute. Something's coming, someone else mutters back. They're plotting. Bet they're waiting for the feast day. Another nods solemnly. They always strike near a holy day. It's easy to chuckle at all this. But when the clouds hang like lead and the village spread stalks start to look suspiciously nibbled, you start listening too, just in case. By mid-morning, a local school teacher invites you into her thatch-roofed home to show you something she is hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. Inside, resting on a neatly folded bit of linen, is a small toad skeleton delicately preserved and oddly ceremonial. His name was Fernie, she says. He predicted the spring floods of '63. You're not sure how to respond. Wasn't it also true that toads became more active before storms because of increased humidity? That their sensitive skin and lungs picked up on subtle shifts in air pressure? or at least from the local amphibians. Based on toad sightings only, he says proudly, handing you a scroll so smeared with ink, blots it could double as an abstract painting. Perhaps the croaking was just a side effect of biology one they couldn't explain, so they gave it purpose. She smiles at your confusion. He used to sit by the window before a storm. Always 3 days in advance, never once failed. Predictive. That the twitch of a webbed foot or a sudden shift in posture could tell you more than a sky full of ominous clouds ever could. And there it is again. The idea that a toad's behavior isn't just random wriggling at S, meaningful next day, hail. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages genuinely believed toads could forecast weather, or if this was simply a narrative people wrapped around coincidence. But here in this village, no one's questioning it. The stories are the truth, not exactly scientific data, but it's earnest. She nods and pulls out a bundle of old parchment, tied with blue twine. You leaf through careful sketches of Fernie squatting, Fernie stretching, Fernie attempting to eat a beetle twice his size. The truth is that Fernie was something of a celebrity. You ask if she kept a journal of his habits, any record that might explain what he did before a storm. And charming still, your logical brain nudges you. Sure enough, her cottage roof looks like a warty invasion. The tavern ties down its outdoor stools, which, to be honest, were never really safe in wind anyway. 7 toads perched along the ridge tiles, unmoving, as if frozen mid-mission, but doesn't matter. In a time without satellites, radar, or reliable calendars, wouldn't any consistent signal feel like a gift from the gods? The blacksmith lashes extra rope around his forge. And short summaries like 3 toads on fence post train by morning, or no croaks after sundown, route feared. You head to the edge of town where a carpenter named Willem keeps an informal weather log. But no one doubts what's coming. Still, the format is consistent. Dates, brief notes on whether you read one from early spring. They've prepared not because they saw the clouds, but because they saw the signs. The toads gave warning. March 11th, fat one near pigsty, looked annoyed. You try not to laugh, but Willem leans in, whispering, he's the cranky one, hates sunlight, always right. There's even a simple scale the toad weather index, as Willem calls it. 5 levels. Still and silent equals dry stretch, occasional hopping equals chance of wind, loud croaking rain imminent, high leaps, heavy storm all across my roof, and 2 on the oven. Toads in groups equals run for your boots, he says. It's not perfect, but better than asking the priest, who just blames everything on sin. You pocket a copy of the index. The next morning, you wake to frantic knocking and open your door to a baker named Ellen, who's sweating profusely and holding a pail. They're everywhere, she hisses. You hurry after her grouped toads. You whisper, level 5. You watch as one slowly blinks, another croaks, softly but deeply. Somewhere behind you, thunder rumbles, and the village reacts. Buckets are brought inside. Flood ditches are cleared. Animals herded uphill. The toads had warned you, and they were right. How the smallest things become guides when the world gets wild. Some folks give quiet thanks to the toads. Others mutter nervous prayers. And sure enough, by nightfall, the sky opens like a trapdoor. Rain lashes sideways. The wind howls like it's telling secrets too fast to understand, but the villagers are ready. And no, one not the most skeptical farmer or the most scientific healers, ignoring that. You sit by your window again, candle flickering and heart oddly calm. Funny, isn't it? You watch one of them now, sheltering under the eaves. It blinks slowly, then turns away. Mission accomplished. The next morning, the village feels waterlogged, like someone dunked it in soup and forgot to wring it out. You trudge through the squishiest patch of road with socks that feel like wet bread, passing a bucket brigade still bailing out the weaver's cellar. She's nursing a mug of something herbal and extremely judgmental. Without being asked, she launches into a story about the time a toad hopped across her doorstep, and 3 minutes later her husband was struck by lightning. Everyone's tired, but no one's surprised. The toads told them it would rain, and it did. You sit with old Hilda by the fire later that day, chewing on a slice of oatcake that tastes exactly how burlap smells. That these squishy little bug vacuums are somehow plugged into the earth's moods, twitching and croaking like biological barometers. You think back to the skeletal remains of Fernie, the toad prophet of 1263, and realize just how deep this belief runs. You blink, he died? No, she snorts. He spilled stew on his lap, but I've never trusted them since. Some written accounts from the early 14th century mention weathering charms involving frogs or toads, but the line between ritual and prank gets muddy, pun intended, especially if it's reluctant, one girl says, half laughing, half serious. Storms hate consent, apparently. She leans in, eyes bright. They know things. That's the crux of it, really. The villagers don't just think toads respond to the weather, they believe toads sense it. Out near the woods, a circle of children gather around a small pit filled with damp soil and 3 rather patient toads. One child chants, not react, not warn, summon. Like storm summoning wizards, only squatter. But now you're hearing something new. Not just that toads predict weather, but that they cause it. Other claims if you pour milk near a toad's den, it brings mist. The ritual is over. Prophecy is unclear. A third suggests tying ribbons to a toad's legs and releasing it in a barley field could encourage thunder. Toads weren't just passive creatures to medieval villagers. They were collaborators in this unpredictable dance of nature. Sometimes audience, sometimes performer. Occasionally, the main act. You're not sure whether that one is superstition or performance art. You find yourself listening to a heated discussion at the baker's shop, where 5 villagers and 1 disinterested cat are arguing whether toads can summon rain. Were they watching the toads for signs, or trying to make the toads create them? They are raindrops. They just walked away. One man insists that placing a toad in a clay pot and burying it under your threshold during a dry spell will make the skies weep. She taps the toad gently on the head with the slate, then watches the sky. Nothing happens. Historians still argue whether this belief in toads as raincallers was widespread or a cluster of local oddities. There is even a belief you hear whispered in the mill house that kissing a toad might bring a storm. You stay with her for an hour and a half. The sky remains stubbornly dry. You don't test that theory, and the moon is high, pale, and swollen, making the water shine like old pewter. Worth a try. Toad, toad, muddy and round, bring the rain to soak the ground. Not just a wrinkled amphibian, but something closer to a weather switch. A croaky little creature that could change the sky if treated just right, or if offended, doom your barley to mold. Leap to the left if storm is nigh. He mimes the explosion, scattering twigs. Something that croaked before the storm, that squatted near your door, and maybe, just maybe, held the power to spare you. Blink your eyes if wind shall die. Surprisingly poetic, until one of the toads hops directly onto the chant leader's foot, prompting a squeal and a general stampede of panic laughter. You can't help but admire the creativity. The deeper you wander into this culture of amphibian augury, the more blurred the lines become between observation and invocation. You meet a hedge witch at the edge of the forest who gives you your most unsettling story yet. There's a reason toads are shaped like raindrops, she says. She's holding a toad in one hand, a piece of slate in the other. She shrugs. Apparently, she believes that if a toad is struck gently with a stone that's been left under a full moon, it's the sound it makes a sound, it all will be echoed by the sky within the hour. But she's not discouraged. He's probably just tired. You don't push it. Later, you help carry firewood with a farmer who swears he once saw a toad scream lightning. Like actually scream. Loud. Then bang. You raise an eyebrow. He insists. It had a white belly. They're volatile. That evening, you take a walk past the pond, watching, waiting. You crouch, One blinks. You blink back. You wonder what medieval minds truly saw when they looked at a toad. It wasn't about proof. It wasn't even really about weather. It was about meaning, about having something, anything you could look to when thunder loomed or drench you. You turn away from the pond and head back towards your borrowed bed. The wind picks up, soft and curious. A toad croaks once, low and slow, and the first raindrop kisses your nose. You wake to the sound of dripping, not a storm, just that slow, patient after rain kind of dripping, the kind that makes the thatch above you sigh and shift and mutter. The air smells like damp moss and yesterday's stew. You stretch under the scratchy wool blanket, wondering if you dreamed the part about a toad whispering weather secrets to the moon. Spoiler, you didn't outside. The village is coated in a soggy hush. It's a kind of medieval hangover, where everyone's slightly stunned by how hard the sky hit, and yet grateful the chickens survived. You wander toward the market square where a few merchants are already, brushing puddles off their displays and making mild complaints to no one in particular. This one warned us of Tuesday's squall by facing due west, swear on me apron. This one here, he points to a toad that seems to be sulking. He predicted the frost 2 years ago by not moving for 3 days. Then you spotted a cart with a sign. Toads for loan, 1 penny a week, well behaved only, and next to it, a large woven cage of toads. Some squat, some flat. One deeply offended-looking specimen perched dramatically on a bit of bark like it's the mayor of Moistington. The man running the cart, a cobbler named Emmerich, is already mid-sell. You step closer, so you rent them. He grins. Of course, house toad, porch toad, window toad, you name it. It's not uncommon to hear folks refer to their toads as Sir Weatherbottom or Baron Forecast with total sincerity. In fact, naming your toad is encouraged. Superstition says if you fail to name it, the toad won't warn you of hail. But tucked in the corner, just beside the votive offering bowl, is a shallow clay dish filled with water. A toad sits in it like royalty, only fuzzier and moodier. Some folks keep them in little boxes lined with damp moss. Others build tiny toad gardens near their doors, miniature sanctuaries filled with pebbles, mushrooms, and the occasional spoonful of ale. Apparently, having a live toad on hand has become the medieval equivalent of checking your weather app. Then she leaves a coin in the bowl and touches the toad's back with 2 fingers. It doesn't move. More reliable than Brother Anselm's shoulder creaks, if you ask me. Yes, ale. Because according to local legend, offering ale to your household toad makes it 23% more accurate in its forecasts. Toads have slowly squelched their way from useful omen to spiritual touchstone. In a world of uncertainty, their quiet, squishy patience is oddly comforting. Why? Nobody knows. But historians still argue whether this was done for predictive power or because villagers just enjoyed imagining slightly drunk toads. Giving weather advice, you spend part of your day helping a blacksmith install a toad shelf. Above his forge, it's a flat plank just under the eaves, meant to be shady, cozy, and apparently irresistible to frogs. He explains, hammering nails with more enthusiasm than accuracy, that toads can't be forced. They must choose to dwell with you. You get a toad settler, he says. Eyes wide, and your roof never leaks, his apprentice mutters, unless you kick it off by accident. Which we don't talk about, the blacksmith says, suddenly very focused on his work. The idea is that a toad adopting your home is a blessing part, whether oracle, part anti-plague charm, part grumpy little roommate, and in this century, hail is personal. You head next to the village shrine, small, mostly wood, with faded saints and a half-melted candle that smells vaguely of cheese. A note beside it reads, for rain or mercy, consult the pond bishop. The sky's clearing, but the air still hangs heavy. But honestly, who needs a clear line? When the toads offer a croak, the people listen. When they vanish, the people prepare. And when they perch in windows, blinking like sleepy weathermen, the people wait. The toads, those left from the storm, are lingering in corners and gutters, like little soggy detectives waiting for the next big case. A woman kneels nearby, whispering something toward the toad with total reverence. One toad watches you from a rain barrel. Its belly pulses gently. It does not move. You whisper to a passing friar, "Is that normal?" He shrugs. It becomes clear that this isn't just weather superstition, It's borderline worship. Later, you find yourself in the company of a traveling scribe who has compiled a hand-illustrated booklet titled Rainy Friend, the Toad Almanac You Skim Through. It's half weather predictions, half poetry, half dubious medical advice. Yes, that's three halves.
Accuracy is flexible in this era.
There's a section on toad moods and their meanings. Croaking while facing north rain within 2 days. Hopping over your left shoe high winds, flattened and wide-eyed thunderstorm incoming. Refusing to move from your best chair, seek higher ground. Immediately, you reach a poem titled Ode to the Warty Prophet, which contains the immortal lines. He croaks when clouds prepare their dance. He blinks before the skies advance. He knows what saints and kings do not. The forecast in his blessed squat. It's terrible. You love it? You close the almanac and glance outside. The line between superstition and science is hard to draw in this world. Sometimes they name them Gary. You walk back to your lodging under a sky smeared with lavender dusk. You offer it a respectful nod. Evening, sir. It blinks, which by local custom means scattered showers at dawn. The next day you find the village in a full-on frenzy, not because of a storm, but because of something even more unpredictable, a visiting noble. Sir Ulrich of Fenmore arrives with a glittering retinue, 5 absurdly shiny horses, and a feather in his cap so large you assume he's smuggling a bird. He's here to inspect the land, or something vaguely feudal like that. But the real scandal is what he brings with him. A foreign toad. A sleek, oddly vibrant creature with smooth green skin and golden flecks, riding in a velvet-lined cage like some kind of amphibious deity. The cage has its own parasol. Someone fans it with a goose feather, and not just any foreign toad. You're speechless, and a boy selling onions hurls one in the toad's general direction. He misses, of course, but the message is clear. This is not a welcome weather prophet. So is the entire village. Imported from Iberia, Sir Ulrich says, as if this clears everything up. Predicts hurricanes and occasionally seizures. Old Hilda mutters something about frogs with airs. The local toad keepers look personally offended. What follows is an impromptu town meeting that quickly turns into a passive-aggressive toad showdown. Locals begin bringing their own toads forward, each more lumpy and unimpressed than the last, placing them side by side with the imported specimen to see which croaks first. It's the Middle Ages. This counts as science. The book turns out to be less a codex and more a loose bundle of goat-hide pages covered in smudged drawings of clouds, leaves. And what you're told is a very symbolic puddle. The Iberian toad blinks once, then squats dramatically. Swampy Hilda's toad farts. You've never seen so many adults nod so solemnly at something so. Historians still argue whether these toad duels were actual events or just embellished folktales. Some chronicles mention beast matches involving trained rodents or cats in prediction contests, but this may have been the only documented instance of international amphibian rivalry. You'll regret this when the Iberian one predicts your famine. There's a festival feel, music, terrible dancing, and a game called Hopscotch Prophet, which involves tossing stones and yelling at toads to pick a square. The village priest, clearly torn between blasphemy and curiosity, announces that he will consult a local book of signs to determine which toad's behavior aligns most closely with upcoming weather events. Refused every fly I offered. And then boom, half the town's coughing blood. You are 90% sure he's just making things up, and tells you the tale of a toad named Murney, who allegedly predicted a plague by refusing to eat flies for 3 days. He just sat there, contemplative-like. Maybe they genuinely don't care. If it smiles, prepare a feast, a child tells you. If it frowns, run to the hills. Some of these amphibians were even said to be reincarnated monks or forest spirits who took squishy form to help mortals. To your genuine amazement, sudden clap of thunder interrupts the meeting and everyone gasps as the local toads start hopping toward shelter, while the Iberian one just sits there, looking pretty. Multiple villagers speak of a legendary, possibly immortal toad that lives in the clouds, depending on how wide its mouth is. Yes, in the clouds. Not on a mountain. Not under a well. But floating somewhere up there, drifting along the sky's underbelly, croaking thunder and blinking out lightning. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the villagers didn't need strict boundaries between truth and belief. Maybe in their muddy, chaotic world, the toad had to be more than just an animal, said Here Lies Murney. He croaked before we did. Who knows what you'll take your signs wherever you can get them, even from a blinking, burping little marsh pillow. The crowd erupts. Homegrown wins again, someone shouts. Ours feel it in their bones, or in their warts, says another. Sir Ulrich, unbothered, simply sips wine from a silver goblet. That evening, villagers gather for a celebration that's only slightly about the noble departure, and mostly about reaffirming their love for native toads. You notice that the toads seem utterly unfazed. Maybe they're just used to being the center of attention now. Families pass down stories of great prophecy toads like others pass down swords or embroidery patterns. Or maybe they're soaking it all in, preparing their next forecast with the stoic silence of beings who live in mud but rule the clouds. You sit beside a merchant named Odwin, who offers you a cup of cider. You grimace. Did he survive? Oh, Murney lived to be 12, buried him in a walnut shell, gave him his own gravestone. Somehow touching and vaguely horrifying at the same time. Toads weren't just forecast tools. They were companions, beloved even. And you hear whispers of one more thing, the sky toad. Now, before you scoff, listen. Children are told that if you dream of the sky toad, it means great weather is coming or terrible luck. You ask what happens if it winks? Marry rich, they say solemnly. The line between history and fairy tale is so blurry. Now that you could wipe your hand across it and end up with nothing but folklore dust, it had to be magic. It had to be a friend. It had to mean something. Because when your crops depend on the rain, and the rain depends on... You tip your mug to the nearest toad and say, "Good call on the thunder, buddy." It doesn't croak. But it does blink twice, which probably means wind or taxes, you never really know. The festival winds down, but your fascination with these warty weather whisperers only deepens. You wake the next morning with a new mission, to follow the toads. Locals call it the Highway of Gloom, though no one remembers why. As you watch, several toads plop along in a determined single-file line, all heading east. Not in a weird Stalker-Y way, but more of a medieval fieldwork for the sake of science approach, which in this case involves crouching near puddles for several hours, with a piece of dry bread and a notebook made of bark. You begin behind the baker's cottage, where a popular toad path winds through a mossy ditch. Some scholars point out that medieval folks were brilliant at observing nature. They had to be. Others suggest the whole directional toad theory may have been a kind of cozy placebo, reassurance wrapped in slime. A shepherd leans over the fence. Storm coming from the west, he says, spitting into the grass. Toads always go opposite of bad weather. Always, you ask. The air is thick with that rich, earthy smell of old rain and waiting plants. The quiet is the kind that feels deliberate. Well, except when they don't. They are fact and fairy tale, priest and prankster. They croak prophecy and poop on your boot, or so says local lore. Others believe it's because a saint once meditated here and turned into a toad himself, or turned someone else into one, Cedric says. Details are fuzzy. Saints are like that. Historians still argue whether toads really have directional instinct regarding weather, or if people just saw patterns because they needed to. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of toads gather and croak in eerie harmony. It's less like ribbiting and more like some ancient chant, rising and falling in waves, as though the mud itself were singing. Still, you follow the toads waddle into a field, past a crumbling shrine and a cow so bored it might actually be asleep with its eyes open. Not a soft drizzle. Either this is a full-volume medieval storm, sideways rain, thunder like falling kettles and villagers sprinting to rescue chickens, but wetter. Maybe this is how the rain gods check their inbox. Local herbalist claims their skin vibrates when rain is near, but only if you hum the right melody at them. Think of it as a damp little GPS for frogs with secret handshakes. You notice that the toads seem to favor certain routes always shaded, always damp, and often near standing water. It's a circular hut with a retractable moss roof and 16 toad niches, each positioned to face a different wind direction. She would release toads into the chamber before storms, then chart their movements with chalk. Fireflies blink lazily, reeds rustle, and then there it is, a long, low chorus. At least enough that monks now occasionally release frogs into the chapel. just to double-check the skies. A pulsing wall of sound, as if the very air is breathing with them. It's weirdly beautiful and strangely moving. One leaps onto a flat stone that's been etched with a faint spiral. It's practically toad heaven. A cluster of them has gathered near the roots, motionless, except for the occasional twitch or blink. Maybe belief isn't about proof, it's about comfort. A monk named Brother Cedric is also here, sitting cross-legged and sketching in the dirt. You sit beside him, and turns and hops the other direction. You ask a nearby girl tending herbs. They'll do their weird little dances whether you're watching or not. Is that a toad marker? She shrugs. Some say they remember spots better than people do, like pigeons. Apparently, there's a whole network of unofficial toad paths that snake through the region, marked with runes, stacked pebbles, or bits of bone. You arrive next at a willow grove cool, dark, buzzing with insects. They like this place, he says without looking up. Something about the bark or the mushrooms. Maybe they just find my sermons tolerable. You watch a particularly round toad stare down a beetle, then change its mind and do nothing instead. Brother Cedric explains that this grove is thought to be sacred by some toads arrive here before heavy weather, possibly drawn by subtle changes in air pressure. You're struck by how toads exist in 1,000 places at once, biologically real, spiritually symbolic, and symbolically absurd. You hear about another phenomenon, the toad choir? It happens, you're told, only on certain nights before long rains. You want to believe this is real? You need to. So that night, you head out again, alone this time, into the lowlands past the mill pond. Not shrill, not sharp, but deep and rhythmic. Croak, pause, croak, and then others join. You sit still, letting the toad song wash over you, wondering if they know something you don't. The next morning, as if on cue, the heavens open. Everyone nods. Of course, the toads knew. Even the skeptical baker mutters, "All right, maybe they do hear something." You begin to hear more whispers about how toads commune with the clouds or have the wind's memory stored in their bellies. You try it, it does not work. The toad pees on your hand and hops away. Offended, you feel mildly blessed. Later, you hear of an eccentric noblewoman, Lady Elsbeth, who constructed what she called a toad observatory. She also gave them each little hats, allegedly to enhance cognition. Historians still argue whether Lady Elsbeth was ahead of her time, or just desperately lonely. But her records, decades of scribbled notes and toad position diagrams still survive in a monastery library. And weirdly, some of her predictions did correlate with weather patterns. You begin to wonder, maybe the truth doesn't matter as much as the rhythm. The ritual, the act of watching, listening, waiting, and honestly, the toads don't mind either way. You sit under a thatched awning as the rain trickles into rivulets. A fat toad hops by and stops. You nod at it, blinks once. You think, dry skies by morning. And you smile. You wake to soft sunlight bleeding through the cracks in the shutters. The thatch above your bed creaks with dew. Outside, the grass is still wet from last night's storm, and a faint mist curls along the fence posts. As you stretch and creak your joints like an old drawbridge, a thought croaks into your mind uninvited. How did all this start? Not just your weird little obsession with medieval toads, but the belief. The frog is barometer thing. He greets you with mild suspicion and offers you something that may or may not be tea. You accept it anyway, because that's what curiosity demands. You've seen the rituals, the observations, the strange toad hats. But what lit the spark? So you go looking. The village scribe, an impossibly thin man named Warwick, lives in a loft that smells like dusty ink and unwashed beard. You want frog history? He asks, one eyebrow climbing halfway up his forehead. Dangerous knowledge? People have gone mad trying to decode amphibian omens. You grin. I've already gone mad watching them sleep on mushrooms. He chuckles, sets down a crusty book the size of a small sheep, and begins flipping through pages so yellowed they look like old cheese. Earliest mentions of frog or toad prophecy date back to the Greeks, he says. They watched frogs leave water before storms, Romans 2. You didn't need everything to make perfect sense, you just needed it to feel true, or scary, or both. Others said it meant you were cursed and about to sprout boils. Same frog, different spin. Thought frogs had water magic. Pliny the Elder wrote a whole section on it, but in others, Especially after bad storms or crop failures, people blame toads for summoning too much rain, as if they were whispering wet chaos into the clouds. On one hand, they were useful symbols, earthy, humble, tied to cycles of rain and rebirth. But you've got to admit it has a certain mossy poetry to it. On the other hand, they were also associated with witches, demons, and the kind of dreams that made you wake up clutching your blanket and reciting psalms. It's a toad, wearing a crown, holding what looks like a lightning bolt in one foot and a lily pad in the other. But it's a nonsense full of patterns and heartbeats, the kind that makes lonely villagers feel like they're part of the storm, not just at its mercy. A girl kneels beside it, eyes closed, whispering, "Please bring rain." Not too much, but just enough so the wheat gets tall and we don't have to eat turnips again. The caption reads, "Templum Bufanus, the frog temple." In exchange for rain-predicting abilities, they were turned into squat, silent servants of the storm, not the toad's alleged powers, but the human need to make anything feel knowable, predictable, alive. And every time a toad croaks before a rainfall, it's fulfilling its ancient obligation. Like a ritual you keep performing, not because you believe it works, but because not doing it would feel wrong, unsafe, like skipping a seatbelt before a long ride. According to him, if you hear 9 consecutive croaks in total darkness, it means a 3-day drizzle is coming, and a letter from someone you haven't seen in years. Mainstream fact check. You sip your strange tea with renewed interest. But not before they carved a rain gutter shaped like a giant toad's mouth, just in case a toad hops by, just in case it wants to send a message. 1, blink for sun, 2, for wind, 3 meant you should hide your tools. You meet a thatcher who swears a certain breed of toad can sniff out thunder the way dogs sniff bacon. You nod solemnly, because at this point, why not? But where it continues, the Middle Ages made it weird, as they do. He explains that once Christianity spread across Europe, frogs and toads got tangled in the messy tapestry of morality. Some said a toad on your doorstep meant rain, he adds. Ask how those ideas didn't cancel each other out. They didn't have to. Medieval thinking could hold contradictions like a basket holds eggs. That explains a lot. You learn that in some texts, toads are seen as sacred weather sentinels creatures, touched by God to help the poor read the skies. And this is where things take a turn into fringe territory. There's a long-standing tale of the weather toad pact, allegedly penned by a minor Saxon bishop who believed toads were once humans who made a deal with the wind god. Historians still argue whether this legend was ever believed or just drunken folklore muttered around peat fires. Wierich pulls out a parchment scrap with an illustration. He shrugs. Some monastery in Bohemia built a shrine to a toad once, claimed it granted weather miracles. Church shut it down within a decade. You love that? You leave Wierich's place spinning with imagery frog priests, temple gutters, toad-faced lightning gods. It's nonsense, yes. You pass by a cobbler who tells you his grandmother could read frog blinks like tea leaves. Later, you walk past a field where children are building toad temples out of sticks and moss. One has a tiny mud altar. You're moved in a weird way. These children are mimicking rituals they don't even fully understand, passed down through games and bedtime tales, and maybe that's the real power. That night at the tavern, an old man recounts the tale of the 9 croaks. You ask if it's true? He shrugs. Worked once. Then I stopped counting. That's kind of how all of this feels. Before bed, you set a small stone by your windowsill. It doesn't show. But you sleep better anyway. By now, you're in too deep. You no longer just see toads you expect them. You hear phantom croaks in your sleep. Your dreams are swampy, and your socks are never dry. Honestly, it's become a lifestyle. So when a traveling peddler named Marn shows up with a cart full of weatherwares, including a box labeled Storm Toad Starter Kits, you don't even flinch. Inside the box, one ceramic toad painted greenish-brown and looking vaguely ashamed, a parchment of toad care instructions, and a small pouch of weatherstones, which you retold change color when a storm is coming assuming you hold them near the toad. Much like a beloved cat or a well-worn blanket, having a toad nearby was seen as grounding. Predicting the rain was one thing. Predicting your loneliness is entirely another. You raise a skeptical eyebrow. In another, a widow swore that if she whispered her dreams into a toad's ear, the weather would match her mood. They were weaving emotion, routine, and weather into one strange, sticky quilt. In some parts of the Holy Roman Empire, people placed toads under their floorboards before harvest. Why? Because happy toads meant heavy yields. It's not for accuracy, Marn says, winking. It's for company. Turns out, toads, real or not, have been comfort objects for generations. Marn shares tales from other villages. In one, elders carved toad statues from wood and placed them in gardens. Inside, you find a mossy font, broken pews, and, oddly, a nufa fresco. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual belief or just another excuse to trap amphibians under furniture. A ribbon of text curls above his head. Can't read it all, but one phrase catches your eye. He who listens to the earth need not fear the sky. Like the way puddles form near the tree roots first. Or how the wind smells different when it carries distant rain. They call it the frog's vigil. They place offerings, flowers, bits of bread, shiny stones at the edge of the stream. Children craft tiny rafts from bark and moss, placing miniature toad effigies atop them and setting them adrift. Or how your body aches slightly before a storm, like it's in on a secret you haven't decoded yet. Either way, it tells you something important. These people weren't just predicting storms, forewarning us, even if they don't always get it right. The acknowledgement that even old myths, wrinkled and wet and warty, can be loved for trying, for sitting close, for croaking into the dark. And speaking of weather, the patterns have gotten odd. The clouds move backward. It's midsummer, yet the wind shifts with no warning. Rain falls for 5 minutes, then disappears, then comes back upside down. Or at least, that's how it feels. The toads. It's quiet, too quiet. To find comfort in croaks and shadows and mossy riddles. That's when you hear about the toad silence. He watches a raft float out into the stream, candle flickering in its tiny clay bowl. A village elder named Brada, who hasn't spoken in months, breaks her silence to issue a warning. When the toads stop croaking, the sky has stopped listening. Delightfully cryptic, and also probably just superstition. But you can't help but feel the air press heavier on your shoulders. In your wandering, you come across an old, overgrown chapel, clearly abandoned, with ivy-like drapes and owls acting like they pay rent. Not quite 9, but enough to stir the leaves, ruffle your thoughts. It shows a saint standing barefoot in the rain, holding a toad in one hand and a torch in the other. You sit for a long time under that image. It's not just about toads anymore, is it? It's about listening. It's about noticing things no one else bothers to. You return to town, and something has shifted. The villagers are preparing for a festival, not one you've seen before. It's small, informal, and highly improvised. People light candles in old jars. You ask a weaver why they do it. She shrugs. Just a little thanks for keeping us company. And maybe that's the best part of it. As dusk falls, you sit beside a boy no older than 8. Do you think they know we're watching? Yes. You don't know how to answer, so you just smile. Later that night, a single toad croaks. Loud, then another, then a third. Maybe they don't, but the clouds seem softer. The wind feels warmer. And the rain holds off just a little longer. You lean out the window and whisper, "Thanks." Maybe they hear you. You're relearning something that medieval people knew all along. The world doesn't need to be explained completely, to be experienced deeply. It's okay to live between knowing and believing, to trust the rhythm of things. Because honestly, what's more human than looking at a lump of living mud and thinking that thing knows something I don't? You fall asleep with the window cracked open, listening for more. You wake up with your face mashed into a pillow that smells faintly of straw and storm. Outside, the world is whispering, leaves rustle like gossiping old women, and the ground squelches with recent memory. A single toad sits on your windowsill, just staring. It's not moving, not croaking, just watching. You nod at it like, cool, good chat, and it hops off without another sound. The trail up is steep, full of loose stones and regret. He's missing one eyebrow. You don't ask. But as you climb, something shifts. The air tastes cleaner. The silence deepens. You swear your thoughts echo. You're getting used to these moments, odd. Quiet interludes where time hiccups and reality seems half made of damp linen and superstition. Yet toads, he claims, are the most misunderstood. There's a carved toad made of bone, a frog preserved in wax, painting titled Le Toad Deileriged, the Toad of the Storm. you stretch, slip on your boots, and head to see someone who's been mentioned more than once, the weather monk. His name is Brother Emilio, and his monastery sits on the edge of a limestone cliff, far from the village, closer to the wind. Pre-scientific meteorology was a mix of observation and vivid imagination. Brother Emilio greets you barefoot, with fingers ink-stained and robes that look like they were tailored by someone who gave up halfway through. You've come about the toads, he says, before you can open your mouth. Of course, apparently, there was once a belief popular in a few Germanic abbeys that certain toads could literally inflate with storm energy, like physically puff up if a storm was near. Some monks claimed they could see the swell. Others, naturally, accused them of confusing it with indigestion. He leads you inside to a cluttered study scrolls piled high, dried herbs hanging from the beams, and an entire shelf dedicated to amphibian paraphernalia. Emilio explains that monastic scholars have long studied animals as weather guides, not just toads, but swallows, ants, cats, and bees. They recorded patterns with genuine curiosity: how many toad sightings before rainfall, which direction they hopped, how loud their croaks were. But they also wove those patterns into moral stories, liturgical calendars, and portents. It wasn't just that toads predicted rain, it was that rain had meaning. They're like monks, he says. Slow, still, observant, close to the earth. They don't react unless they have to. That resonates. Pulls out a thick codex, wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax. Breaking the seal, he flips to a page decorated with a ring of toads around a sunburst. Medieval weather watchers believed that toads could sense subtle pressure changes long before humans could. You nod solemnly, like two strangers at a bus stop who sense they're living parallel lives. If you want the truth, you start with the ground. Exist. And somehow, that existence ripples out, telling stories in the shape of weather. They don't overthink, just. They theorize that a toad's belly was attuned to sky humors, invisible vapors rising from the ground before a storm. How many croaks were just complaints about cold feet, not coded messages from the clouds? It doesn't do anything, but it feels right inside live about a dozen real toads, all plump and thriving. This, he says, tapping the illustration, is the circle of moisture. Monks would monitor their behavior, what they ate, how they moved, whether they sat on stones or under leaves. Some believe their habits predicted more than weather. They could foretell moods, illnesses, even dreams. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient and medieval thinkers really did buy into this vapors from the earth stuff. But the fringe stuff comes next. Brother Emilio flips to a chapter titled The Toad's Bellows. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or if someone actually sat there timing frog bloats with cloud cover. You lean closer? Were these rituals or science? Emilio smiles the way someone does before dropping uncomfortable truths. Both and neither. He explains that weather monks often walked a line between faith and observation. One scroll he shows you contains entries like June 4th, 5 croaks before dusk. Drizzle. Sister Hild regretted her harshness. Coincidence? August 11th, silence in the pond. 3 days of sun. Children laughed more. The toads approve. You kinda love it. There's one final item, Emilio insists you see. The frugarium. It's not a joke. In the garden behind the monastery, down a short stone path, is a large, circular enclosure lined with wet moss and shaded by fig trees. This is what remains of the old practice, he says. There's wisdom in watching, he says. Most people listen to the sky, but the sky is loud, too obvious. Toads don't panic. You lean over the low wall and watch a particularly fat toad blink at you. Emilio touches your shoulder. You leave the monastery full of quiet ideas. There's a peace in this slow, sticky, low-tooth earth approach to life. You wonder how many frogs monks misinterpreted? How many lazy leaps were taken as divine signs? And still they watched. They kept watching. That night, back in your room, you sketch the circle of moisture in the dirt beside your bed. Outside, the toads sing not loud, not insistent, just present, like monks chanting prayers not meant to be answered, only heard. The next morning, you re-jolted awake, not by birdsong or roosters, or even a fresh toad on your pillow, but by shouting. Not panicked shouting, just theatrical village volume yelling. like someone trying to move a cow in their dignity at the same time. You pull on your tunic, stumble outside, and are immediately hit with the smell of damp wood, early bread, and something else smoke. No, not fire smoke, pipe smoke, thick with herbal nonsense. Then you see the source. It's Tilda, the local herb witch. Earned the title by sheer volume of confidence and an impressive wardrobe of moss-colored cloaks, but not real ones. Wooden toads, bronze toads, a single porcelain toad with rhinestones for eyes that you pretty sure came from someone's wedding cake. Now, which here is a generous term, Tilda mostly sells headache poultices and love potions that smell suspiciously like horseradish. Today she's holding court in the center of the market square, standing beside a wooden cart covered in surprise more toads. It's hard to tell whether anyone believes her, or if this is just more morning entertainment than watching Jacob drop his eggs again. They speak to me, she declares, and they say the rain is not yet finished. The villagers listen, half amused, half intrigued. You sidle up next to her. What kind of toads are these? But her toad divination has a devoted following, especially among villagers who prefer flair with their forecasts. Some records suggest that whether witches like Tilda were tolerated because they boosted community morale, kind of like medieval meteorologist clowns. Bronze, it's reliable but gloomy. Wood, honest but emotional. Porcelain, fickle and likely to lie if not polished. She grins. The kind that don't squirm when you dress them in little hats. Sure enough, one has a tiny felt bonnet, frog from another world of elegance. Tilda's niche in the weather forecasting realm is more performative than predictive. She claims the material of the toad sculpture affects its accuracy, because tucked into her props and flower circles is a sharp observational memory. She's noted how the smell of the ground shifts before a thunderstorm. She knows which winds mean fast rain and which mean heavy fog. It's elaborate twigs for walls, leaves for ramps, a small bowl of water as the goal. Yes. One boy says they're testing which toads are the smart ones. And she's noticed too. You're surprised that the frogs in her garden have been laying low for days? Just pay attention. Historians still argue whether these theatrical traditions were serious beliefs or tongue-in-cheek rituals. When they go quiet, she whispers, "I wear this. Reminds me, not everything loud is wise." She invites you to try a reading. It's not about being right, it's about staying curious, about listening low to the ground, about sharing stories that bind weather and wonder in one damp croak. Turns out, none of the toads seem particularly invested in completing the maze. But at this point, it's just part of your vibe. They're part of the culture. Symbols, stories, little weird, wet anchors in a world that doesn't always make sense. They sit, blink, maybe hop in the wrong direction. The kids cheer anyway. You pick the copper toad, place it in the middle of a weather circle, drawn in flour on the cobblestones, and close your eyes. "What color do you feel?" she asks. The pews are empty. Rain taps against stained glass windows, and the toad turns to you and says, "You know, it's not really about the rain," you reply, dark green with a hint of storm anxiety. "The wind smells of wet hay?" She nods solemnly. A frontal squabble, then, possibly hell-related. A few of the onlookers clap. You try not to blush. Here's the real thing. Though Tilda's act may be absurd, but she's not entirely off base. She points to a black stone toad amulet dangling from her belt. You leave her stall with a free toad charm, in the sense that medieval Europe was less about magic versus science, and more about both at once, slathered in garlic and theater. Later, wandering the village outskirts, you pass a group of boys building a toad maze. You watch for a bit. It hits you. These frogs aren't really for prediction anymore. There's a lovely, unspoken rule to how people interact with them. Don't force them. Don't scold them, and don't expect them to perform. As you walk back into the village, clouds roll in, not heavy storm clouds, but the gauzy kind that whispered more than warn. That night, you dream of a single toad sitting in the middle of a cathedral. You wake up smiling. It isn't, it never was. It's about noticing the little things. Toads is metaphors. Croaks is caution. Moisture is mood. And yes, you still smell like mud and existential humidity. You're starting to walk with a bit of a hunch knot, out of old age or injury, but because you've gotten into the habit of glancing down, always on toad watch. A villager named Wendrick told you about an old hermit who lives out here. Knows frogs better than his own family, Wendrick said. He's probably raised by them. Step, step, check, step, step, croak. It's become instinctive, like reaching for your keys or blaming Mercury retrograde. Around the entrance are dozens of flat stones, each painted with what appears to be a different species of toad. Some are labeled, some just say things like Gregory or extremely mean. On this particular day, your wanderings take you to the edge of the forest, a quieter stretch of land where the moss grows thick. And the trees seem like they're waiting for something. Here's a tunic made of stitched-together potato sacks and a crown of reeds. His beard has twigs in it. When he sees you, he lifts a hand in greeting and says, "You're late." "They told me you'd come." You assume that's hyperbole. You're wrong. The man's name is Hal. No one knows if it's short for Harold or hallucination. Royalty even wore them set in rings. Nothing like a bit of bone bling to say, "I am fancy and weatherwear." It's small, dark, and suspiciously warm. I say, not both. You're 95% sure it's just been in his armpit. You decide not to ask who they are. It's memory, biological memory, earth memory, and the toads. They listen better than we do. Pliny recorded the belief that toads held magical stones in their heads, called toadstones, which could detect poison. People in medieval Europe took this idea and ran with it like it owed them money. Hal's home is more of a mound than a cottage built into the side of a hill. It's covered in ivy and humming faintly with insect life. That a toad's silence isn't just absence, but record. Like how tree rings show droughts, or how some people always know when it's going to rain because their knees sing sea shanties. You follow him inside. The walls are lined with jars, mud, rainwater, herbs, small bones, and what might be pickled eyeballs. Not human, you hope. The air is thick with swampy incense. Yes, he made that up. No, he's not sorry. Birds resume chirping like they were just waiting for their cue. Not always, not reliably, but enough to make you wonder. Maybe it's the damp air curling into your ears like secrets. Or maybe, just maybe, it's that you've been listening so long now that your own body is tuning in. People open shutters, shake out linens, and look up with cautious smiles. You sit on a low stone wall and let the warmth soak in. It's less spa day and more bog. You resist the urge to cough. Oh, the peddlers, the children, the skeptics, the believers. "Do you want the long story?" Hal asks. "Or the true one?" He shrugged. "Whichever involves fewer eye jars." He laughs. "Fair." Then he sits cross-legged, gestures for you to do the same, and begins. Hal looks skyward, squints and says, 5 minutes. Then son, toads told me. Mainstream historical fact time. Hal tells you about Pliny the Elder, yes. That Pliny, the Roman naturalist who wrote natural history, they believed toadstones could also be used to detect storms by warming up or vibrating. But here's the fringe bit. Hal claims that some families passed down real toadstones, ones that would quiver before a lightning strike. He pulls one out of a velvet pouch. Historians still argue, he says, swirling tea made from something that looks like regret, whether these were metaphors for intuition or actual devices. And that's kind of Hal's whole vibe. He believes toads don't just forecast whether they remember it, but they hold echoes of storms past in their bodies, in their bones. It's not science, he says, sipping his terrifying tea. You nod slowly, partially in agreement, and partially because the tea might be hallucinogenic. Hal shows you an old worm-eaten book. The title has long worn off, but inside are sketches, hundreds of them, of toads in various positions, all annotated with small weather notes. Curled under leaf equals cold front approaching. Facing west equals wind reversal in 2 days. Belly against stone equals incoming humidity. It's not just weather prediction. It's an entire language. He calls it bupholectics, from bufo, the Latin word for toad. And here's the kicker. Some of it works. You step outside just as a soft rain begins to fall. You wait. 5 minutes later, the clouds part, revealing a sliver of blue. Seizes triumphant. You want to dismiss it. You really do. A part of you can't. Maybe it's the tea. The forest toads sing as you leave, their chorus like a lullaby from the mud itself. Back in the village, the air is rich with post-train freshness. You've seen the monks and the villagers, it's the witches and the weavers, and now the hermits. All tied together by a single, weird, warty animal that somehow became a compass for the sky. And maybe, just maybe, for the soul. You sit longer than you mean to, letting the last droplets of rain dry off your sleeves as village life picks back up around you. Somewhere to your left, someone is singing about onions and betrayal, which may or may not be the same thing. It doesn't matter. You're thinking about Hal, about his tea that probably violates 5 modern health codes, about the idea of weather as memory, about toads as tiny, wrinkled historians of the mud. So, of course, when the town bell rings out and a scroll is tacked to the public board, you're already halfway to it before your feet catch up with your curiosity. It's an announcement. A weather competition. Well, they're calling it the Festival of Sky Truth, but let's not kid ourselves. It's a meteorological showdown. 3 groups will compete. The monks of St. Drizzles, the herb witches and mystics, and a surprise third entrant, the traveling scholars from the next town over. I think of them as the academic transfer students Snood-Eye well-read, and carrying way too many instruments in their leather satchels. She enters in a robe covered in fake storm clouds, waving a staff with a frog-shaped knob on top. Her performance includes a chant, 2 toads placed reverently on a velvet mat, and something involving cinnamon smoke. Her prediction? Rain tomorrow at dawn, sun by midday, and a sneeze-worthy breeze at night. You, of course, are now an honorary toad enthusiast and possibly minor local celebrity. The crowd applauds. Their leader, a man named Giles, who has never once blinked during this entire process, presents their forecast with the help of a handmade anemometer. That's a wind measuring device, in case you forgot. Giles didn't. He lives for anemometers. So you're invited to be a neutral participant, which roughly translates to make sure no one cheats using enchanted goats. Because why just forecast rain when you can do it with interpretive dance or a puppet made from turnips? Their predictions are incredibly precise, referencing dew points, sun angles, and a suspiciously detailed knowledge of goat behavior. An actual sneeze-worthy breeze. For people sneeze in unison, like a synchronized sniveling team. The rules are simple. Each group will predict the weather for the next 3 days. Accuracy wins. Bonus points for style, apparently. You also realize you've somehow acquired 3 toad tokens from various groups, which may or may not be a conflict of interest. You hide them under your straw pillow anyway. Some scholars credit them with the earliest forms of meteorological record-keeping in Europe. Day 1 arrives, and the monks go first. They present a scroll. It's written in Latin and sealed with wax. Mainstream fact moment by the late Middle Ages. Monastic communities had indeed begun compiling rudimentary weather logs often tied to agricultural needs. It's completely false, obviously, but delightfully persistent. A few 13th century texts even suggest rituals to bribe the toads into silence during harvest season. Picture a tiny banquet for frogs. You can't not love that. But while the monks are heavy on facts, they're low on flair. Giles has lost 2 of his students to emotional over-questioning. The monks are fasting for clarity. And Tilda has introduced a new element, a miniature toad throne, which she places Gregory on with great ceremony. He deserves comfort, she says. He's been through so much. They base this on the moss growth patterns on the northern side of the abbey wall. The clouds will argue, but not fight. Then comes Tilda. A child nearby sneezes preemptively. Finally, the scholars. They're clearly the wild card, armed with compasses, brass instruments, and a suspicious fondness for drawing on chalkboards mid-sentence. His forecast? Clouds. A 56% chance of brief precipitation. Potential hail, if the barometric shift trends downward. A few feet away, a small toad sits contentedly by the fire's edge. You name him Cloud, snappy, but forgettable. You suspect it was both. After all, what better way to prepare for unpredictability than to laugh together under an almost storm? You go to bed that night wondering how it'll all turn out. The next morning, dawn breaks with surprise gentle rain. Tilda's eyes light up like a candle dipped in smug. By midday sun, and that evening, just as predicted, the monks grumble. Giles stares at his anemometer in betrayal. Day 2 rolls around. This time, the monks predict overcast skies, no rain, and mild winds from the east. Tilda, she burns lemon balm, consults her toad oracle, and announces there will be thunder, but no storm. The scholars, increasingly tense, produce a rotating map and suggest partial clearing with sudden drops in temperature. Giles adjusts his spectacles with a dramatic sigh. By nightfall, the sky has indeed rumbled a few deep theatrical booms with zero rainfall. Tilda wins again, and the toads unbothered, half buried in mud. Which brings us to the quirky bit of this section. Apparently, some medieval villages believe that toads cause thunder by croaking underground in unison. On the final day of the festival, tensions are high. This time, everyone predicts clear skies, bold move, and then clouds gather, ominous, moody, thunderous, but not a single drop falls. All three groups are technically correct. The judges declared a tie. You, however, declared a metaphor. Sometimes in the medieval weather game, even the most opposing sides can be right in their own ridiculous way. Historians still argue whether festivals like these were rooted in legitimate belief systems or just elaborate community bonding rituals dressed up in seasonal theater. You spend the evening beside a bonfire, watching shadows dance on cobbled stones. Someone passes you a roasted onion. And for the first time in this whole muddy, mossy, slightly surreal adventure, you stop trying to predict anything. You just sit. You just breathe. Just listen. The festival's fires burn low now. Ash curls into the air like lazy thoughts, and the villagers begin drifting back to their homes. Feet dragging in the dirt, conversations soft and scattered like loose threads. You stay behind a little longer, watching the embers glow and listening to the quiet thrum of toads singing in the distance. It's not just noise anymore. Not to you. It's a language strange and sleepy and rich with meaning you almost understand. Almost. The next morning, you wake up before the sun. It's maybe out of habit. Maybe because your dreams have gotten louder. You pack a crust of bread and a small cheese in your bag. You pat your pockets for your toad token still there, an occasional goat birthing room, and they tell you how it used to be.
Act.
It just wore a bit more folklore. No one goes there now, but once, when she was a girl. The village's toad priest kept an entire sanctuary of weather-watching amphibians there. She remembers jars. She remembers music. She remembers the whisper of water against stone. How their ancestors watched the moon's reflection in puddles. How a single toad croak at midnight meant a dry week. And how the town's oldest resident, elderly woman, named Marjorie, with 3 teeth and an incredible hat, once predicted a drought by the way her cat avoided dandelions. The cave isn't far, but it feels like stepping through a curtain. The trees seem to close behind you. Your breath fogs slightly, even though it isn't cold. No one predicted the rain, least of all the local weather reader. A red-nosed man named Otto who insists it's because he misplaced his lucky eel. Then you do something weirdly sentimental. You tiptoe down to the edge of the pond near Hal's forest. Small pools reflect your lantern-like coins dropped into the dark, and near the back you'd see them. Frogs, dozens, just watching, and leave a tiny clay crown on a stone, just in case Gregory needs a backup. A few even describe choruses of the earth, led by animals. Mostly birds, sometimes frogs, often dismissed by scholars. But maybe not by all. Marjorie claps her hands and declares the rain will hold for 2 more days. Otto promptly finds his lucky elander, his hat of all places, and announces that he's retiring. You turn west. Your feet crunch across morning frost. Mist rises in tendrils, curling around your ankles like curious cats. You're not really sure where you're going, but then again, most medieval people weren't. They just followed the road until something interesting happened, or something dangerous made them stop. You suspect you're somewhere in the middle. The frogs join in not chaotically, but in patterns, intervals, pauses, as if the cave itself has become a clock, or a barometer, or a poem. Your skin tightens a few hours before a downpour. Your mood shifts when the toads go silent. Your dreams are full of rippling water, blinking eyes, and the low sound of thunder disguised as a yawn. Along the way, you pass more villages, each with their own weather quirks. One town claims its pigs can smell wind shifts. Another has a stone pillar that sweats before storms. Not even a frog. You do, however, nod politely. Feels necessary. You start a running list in your head titled Things That Shouldn't Predict Weather But Maybe Do. Somewhere between nervous geese and cheese that cracks in the cellar. You find yourself in a small town with a big problem. Their main bridge has collapsed in a recent flood. You understood that forecasting isn't always about certainty, it's about paying attention. Let the frogs quiet now settle into their pools. Let the smell of wet earth and time drift gently through your thoughts. You don't ask. Not all of them are written in the sky. Some live in ponds, in stories. In the way an old woman watches a cat avoid a flower. Let your eyelids fall like curtains drawn over a familiar view. The toads are sleeping too, belly down in mud, dreaming of cool rains and thick clouds of insects that don't fly too fast. Instead, you sit with the villagers around a wide table in the local tavern, which doubles as a courtroom, dance hall, and now you've walked the misty fields and foggy lanes of a world that once swore by toads, whispered to mushrooms, and checked the skies the way we check our phones. You've wandered far from paved roads and streetlights into candlelit kitchens and mossy caves, where the language of the land is older than calendars. Mainstream historical fact alert. It's true that many medieval European communities treated natural signs and animal behavior, plant changes, and even the behavior of mold as legitimate meteorological tools. Marjorie pulls you aside and tells you something quietly. There's a cave nearby. You can't not go. So, after some awkward goodbyes and a strong cup of something herbal and suspicious, you head into the forest again. Inside, the cave is damp and echoing. Moss carpets the walls. One of them croaks once. You freeze. Then, a strange thing happens. The sound of dripping water begins to shift, forming a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Here comes the quirky fringe bit. In some medieval texts, caves were seen as portals-thin places, where the natural and supernatural bled together. Because historians still argue whether those accounts were metaphorical descriptions of ecological balance or early observations of things, like resonance and animal behavior in enclosed ecosystems. You're starting to believe the second. Maybe, when you leave the cave, you don't take anything. Back in the village, you share what you saw. You move on. In the weeks that follow, your path winds through marshes, highlands, coasts, and valleys. You hear 100 different toad tales. One village swears by the three-toed taps method. 3 toads cross your path before breakfast. It's going to hail. Another puts out shallow dishes of wine during the full moon, claiming the toads dance, and the direction they face when finished predicts wind direction. A traveling puppet troupe performs a tragic romance between a toad oracle and a rain spirit. It ends in light mist. And you start to feel changes in the air before they happen. You're not a witch, you're not a monk, you're not a scientist. But you are a listener now. You've joined the long, quiet lineage of people who stopped just long enough to hear what the earth was mumbling through its most unlikely messengers. The weather doesn't care if you believe in it, but the toads might. So as the sounds of this sleepy journey fade, let the hum of old rain return to your ears. 8. You feel your shoulders soften. Your breath slows without trying. Time stretches like morning sun across a stone wall. There's no hurry here. Whatever storms may come, literal or otherwise, you now know the signs. You rest easy in that thought. Let your mind grow still. No need to predict what comes next. You're already exactly where you need to be. Good night.